My parents chuckled while passing my sister $6.9 million. Me? They handed me $1 and snapped. Go earn it yourself, my mother sneered. Some kids simply don't measure up. But when the attorney read Grandpa's last letter, at the will reading, my mom began screaming. Imagine your own family laughing at you, sneering, as you're handed a single dollar at a will reading, while your sister inherits millions. But the real injustice? It wasn't the money, it was the years my parents stole from me and my grandpa, deliberately cutting us off. They thought I was invisible. They were wrong. And my grandpa's final letter was about to be their public, devastating undoing. I pulled up to the family estate in Charleston just before the sun burned off the last of the morning haze. Cicadas already buzzing like a warning in the heat. The live oaks loomed, dripping moss over the gravel driveway. I parked where I used to ride my bike in crooked circles as a kid, back when I still believed home meant something safe. I caught my reflection in the side mirror, plain blouse, hair tied back. Nothing like the sleek dresses I sold would have chosen. My hands trembled as I grabbed my purse, feeling the weight of every mile it took to get here. I paused, looking up at the white-columned porch, rocking chairs lined up like guards. I wasn't sure why I came. Not really. Maybe to prove to myself that I could stand there without shrinking. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and something older, something sharp that reminded me of holidays spent trying not to breathe too loudly. Vera, my mother, sat near the fireplace, ankles crossed neatly, her expression unreadable, except for the tightness around her mouth. My father, Conrad, held a glass of water as if it were a lifeline, nodding at people he barely looked at. Isolde, of course, was laughing near the window, a glass of champagne in her hand, sunlight catching the gold on her wrist. When she saw me, her eyes flicked over my outfit, a smirk touching her lips before she turned back to her conversation. I found a chair in the corner, hoping no one would notice how my legs bounced under the table. Marshall Keene, the family lawyer, cleared his throat, tapping a stack of papers against the table to straighten them. "Thank you for coming today," he said, glancing around the room. Walter Garner left clear instructions that his will be read with all family members present. I folded my hands together, pressing down to stop them from shaking. I felt their eyes on me, quiet judgment from a family that had spent years reminding me I didn't quite fit. I remembered the details of the invitation, my name misprinted as guest +1. When I called to correct it, the secretary stammered before saying, "I'm sure it was just an oversight." I had laughed then, but it was the kind that left your ribs sore. Marshall started reading, his voice steady as he listed off donations to charities, small bequests to distant relatives. Then he paused, looked directly at me, and cleared his throat. To Camila Garner, he read, $1. The silence hit before the laughter. A split second where the world froze, and I heard the blood pounding in my ears. Then Isolde's laugh broke the moment, sharp as glass. "Some kids just don't measure up," she drawled, swirling her champagne. I stared at the single-dollar bill Marshall handed me, the paper already creased as my fingers curled around it. My mother's voice cut through the ringing in my head, calm and cold. "Go earn your own, Camila," she said, as if it were a kindness. As if I hadn't already spent years trying to prove I was worth something. The room filled with small, cruel chuckles. I looked down, studying the floorboards, wishing they would swallow me whole. My face burned, but I kept it still, refusing to give them the tears I knew they wanted. Isolde caught my eye, raising her glass in a mock toast before turning away, chatting about the renovations she planned with her new millions. I stood, slipping the dollar into my pocket. My feet felt heavy as I walked toward the door, weaving past cousins who wouldn't meet my eyes. I could taste the shame, metallic and bitter, settling in my throat. Outside, the porch was empty, the boards warm under my shoes. I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my breath. The cicadas screamed, the heat pressing against me. I closed my eyes, letting the sun sting my eyelids. A memory flashed, Isolde and me as kids, sitting on these steps. Her pushing me off to claim the top spot, telling me, "You're too slow to keep up, May." And me, brushing off my scraped knees, pretending it didn't matter. I pulled the dollar from my pocket, staring at it until the ink blurred. I wanted to crumple it, to throw it in the trash, but my fingers wouldn't let go. Maybe I needed the reminder. Behind me, the door creaked open, and I heard footsteps, soft and deliberate. I didn't turn until I heard Isolde's voice, sweet as syrup. "Oh, don't look so pitiful," she said, stepping beside me. "It's just $1. You always were dramatic." I didn't answer. Didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, something shifted. I felt it. That small, quiet snap that happens when you've finally had enough. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You know, I earned this. Dad always said you were a disappointment. But at least you're good at leaving quietly." I turned my head, meeting her gaze, my voice calm. "You think you've won?" Her smile wavered for just a moment before she scoffed. "Please, May, don't start thinking you're special now." I pushed off the railing, stepping past her, the dollars still in my hand. Each step felt heavier than the last as I crossed the porch, reaching for the door. I didn't know what would come next, but the shame I carried turned into something else. A low, steady burn I felt deep in my chest. Just as I reached for the handle, Marshall's voice carried through the open door. "There is one more document from Walter Garner." I froze. The cicadas seemed to fall silent in my ears. I turned back. My hand hovered just above the door handle as Marshall's voice carried across the room, steady and unhurried. "There is one more document from Walter Garner." His words sank into the thick air like a stone dropped in still water. I turned slow enough to see Vera's fingers tense on her glass, the calm mask slipping just a fraction. Isolde's laughter stopped mid-breath, the champagne glass lowering until it rested against her hip, her eyes starting between me and Marshall. Conrad cleared his throat, shifting in his seat, his jaw moving as if he was grinding down a thought he didn't want to say out loud. Marshall stepped forward, holding a weathered envelope with my grandfather's handwriting on it. I would have recognized it anywhere, that looping script with a slight rightward lean, always written in blue ink. Because, as he told me once, black ink is for bills, blue is for dreams. I felt the dollar bill still in my pocket, crisp against my leg, a reminder of the sting that was fresh, still burning. As Marshall unfolded the letter, the paper crinkled softly. For a moment, I wasn't standing in that stifling room anymore. I was back on the porch of Grandpa's ranch, the air sweet with magnolia and damp earth, wind chimes clinking above the door. I was there, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, my hair tied back, while Grandpa showed me how to tie knots for the tomato trellis. His rough hands moving slowly so I could follow. "You're my little scientist," May, he'd said, pride softening the deep lines on his face. "Someday you'll have a place to build anything you dream up, and you won't need to ask permission." I blinked, the memory dissolving as Marshall's voice filled the room again, reading the letter aloud. "To my granddaughter Camila Garner, who always saw the world with wonder when others chose not to see it all." The words sank into me, warm and sharp, like rain hitting dry ground. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my face calm, my shoulders back. I would not let them see me falter. Not now, not when his voice was here, even if only in ink and paper. Marshall's eyes moved across the room, careful, deliberate, as he continued. "I leave to Camila the Whitman Research Annex, including all laboratory equipment, funding accounts, and all active research patents currently filed under Whitman Innovations." The silence was instant. Like the room had sucked in every breath and held it hostage. Isolde's face lost its flesh, the color draining until she looked almost gray under the soft light. The glass slipped in her grip, hitting the floor with a dull thud, champagne splattering across the polished wood. She didn't even flinch, just stared at Marshall, her lips parting, but no sound came out. Vera's eyes snapped to Marshall, her voice low, but cutting. "This was not the plan, Marshall." Conrad shifted again, setting his glass down with a careful clink, rubbing his thumb along the rim. His gaze hard but distant, like he was trying to calculate how quickly this could be contained. Isolde finally found her voice, and it came out sharp, desperate. "This is insane. That annex is mine. It was supposed to be mine. She doesn't even do anything with her life." Her words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. I stood still, the letter in Marshall's hand like a promise that I had never been as invisible as they made me feel. The dollar in my pocket felt heavier now, but different. Less of a humiliation, and more of a reminder of where I came from, and who had always seen me, even when they didn't. Vera hissed under her breath, stepping closer to Marshall. "Fix this," she demanded, each syllable like ice. "Now." Marshall didn't move, his face unreadable, his fingers resting lightly on the envelope, steady as ever. "I'm afraid this was Walter's wish. It is final." The room erupted. I sold, shouting, Vera's voice rising in cold fury. Conrad finally snapped, before sinking back into his chair, rubbing his temples. I didn't hear every word, but the chaos washed over me, a blur of accusations and denial. In the middle of it all, I stood quietly, the noise fading as I focused on the feel of the letter in my hand when Marshall finally passed it to me. The paper was rough, the edges softened with age, and I could almost smell the faint scent of Grandpa's tobacco, the warmth of his workshop, the sawdust and mint from the candies he kept in his pocket for me. I looked up, watching them fight over what they thought they deserved. And I felt the heat in my chest again. But this time, it wasn't shame. It was something else. Something solid, rising in me like a tide that couldn't be pushed back down. My fingers tightened around the letter. And I stepped back, drawing a breath that felt like the first full breath I had taken all day. Amid the shouting, I lifted my eyes and whispered, steady and clear, "I need to see it." I didn't wait for the shouting to stop. I walked out, my shoes hitting the tile with a steady beat. The heat of the room still clinging to my skin as I stepped into the early evening air. The cicadas were singing loud and constant, as if they were reminding me that the world keeps going, even when everything else feels like it's breaking. 2 days passed, and I found myself driving alone down a narrow, dusty road lined with pine and scrub oaks, the Charleston humidity pressing against the windows of my truck. The letter from Grandpa rested on the passenger seat, the paper worn soft along the folds like it had been waiting for me to open it for years. Every mile I drove, Isolde's voice echoed in my mind. The way she shouted about what was hers. The way she looked right through me when the lawyer read Grandpa's words. I pulled up to the annex just as the sun was rising, painting the tin roof in gold, the glass panels catching the light like mirrors. It looked like an old barn that had been loved back to life, sturdy and simple. I stepped out, gravel crunching under my boots, and stood for a moment, letting the morning air clear the noise from my head. I touched the handle, remembering Grandpa's promise. "Someday you'll have a place to build your dreams without asking permission." My hand tightened, and I pushed the door open. Inside, it smelled like cedar and faintly of machine oil. The kind of clean that feels like work has been done here, not just for show. Sunlight poured through the windows, landing on neat rows of microscopes, lab benches with data tablets stacked carefully. Boxes along the wall labeled in Grandpa's handwriting, Camilla Garner. It was like stepping into a room I had been building in my mind for years, only to find it waiting for me all along. In the center of the room, on a sturdy oak table, was a small, spiral-bound notebook. The cover bent, the edges soft. My breath caught as I picked it up. It was my old notebook, the one I thought I had lost when I was 12, filled with drawings of bees, notes on soil samples I had taken in the yard, messy sketches of plants, and questions I had scribbled in the margins. Grandpa had kept it. I sat down on the stool, flipping through the pages slowly. Each one a memory of a day I spent thinking no one was watching, that no one cared. But he had. He had kept these pieces of me safe. My phone buzzed, pulling me back. Elo's name lit up the screen, and I swiped to answer, pressing it to my ear. "May you there?" Her voice was warm, steady, the way it always was when I needed grounding. "Yeah, I'm here," I said, my voice low. "Document everything, okay? Pictures, videos, keep a record. You don't know what they'll try to pull." I closed my eyes for a second, letting her words settle in me before I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I will." After we hung up, I walked the annex slowly, running my fingers over the surfaces, opening cabinets and drawers, letting the quiet fill me. I felt the grief sitting in my chest, heavy and aching for all the days I could have spent here with him, for the moments they had stolen. I stopped in front of Grandpa's old desk, the wood worn smooth at the edges. The bottom drawer stuck when I tried to open it, and I pulled harder until it came loose, the metal scraping softly. Inside, stacked neatly, were sheets of paper with Grandpa's notes, call logs, and phone records. I pulled them out, skimming the dates, the times, the numbers. Page after page of calls made to my number, calls that I never received. My name was written next to each one. The word "no answer" scrolled in Grandpa's handwriting. My hands shook, the paper rattling as I flipped through the pages, the truth hitting harder with each line. They had blocked his calls. They had cut him off from me. They stole the last chances I had to hear his voice, to sit on that porch with him one last time, to say goodbye. The grief sharpened, turned from a dull ache into something hot and alive, something that felt like it could burn me from the inside out. I stood there, holding the pages against my chest, the room spinning around me as the reality sank in. They hadn't just tried to humiliate me with that dollar bill. They had tried to erase me. To make sure I was nothing more than a name on a page, easily ignored, easily forgotten. But Grandpa hadn't forgotten me. And standing there in the annex, surrounded by everything he had built and saved for me, I felt something shift inside. A resolve. Clear and cold. I lifted my eyes to the light streaming through the windows, gripping the call logs so tightly the paper crumpled. I whispered, "Steady and sure, you erased me, but I'm still here." I held those call logs against my chest until the sun started dipping behind the annex windows, the warm light shifting to a soft glow that turned the glass into mirrors, reflecting a woman I hardly recognized. My reflection was tired but awake, her jaw set, her eyes refusing to look away. That woman was me, and I wasn't going to let them erase me again. A week later, I found myself standing at the end of the stone path leading up to the Garner family home, the oak branches overhead swaying in the early morning breeze. I could hear the quiet rustle of leaves, the chirp of a lone bird, and the muffled thud of my boots on the walkway. My bag, heavy with Grandpa's letter and the call logs, swung at my hip like a promise I was finally ready to keep. I had asked Marshall to be there, and he agreed without hesitation. Elo parked down the street, her text from earlier still sitting unread on my phone. *, you've got this. Call if they try anything. *, I slipped the phone into my pocket, took a breath, and climbed the porch steps. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and the faint tang of lemon polish, the way it always did when Vera was trying to pretend everything was normal. She sat on the couch, hands folded neatly on her lap, her lips pressed together in a line that used to scare me into silence. Isolde lounged in the armchair, scrolling on her phone, her nails tapping the screen, each click like a small slap of disregard. Conrad stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, eyes tracking me as if I was an intruder in the home where I grew up. Marshall cleared his throat, stepping forward with a polite firmness that made Vera's shoulders stiffen. "Thank you all for agreeing to this meeting. We're here to ensure the will is understood and to clarify certain legal matters." Isolde scoffed, not looking up from her phone. "This is ridiculous. We've already settled everything." I took a step closer, setting my bag down and pulling out the call logs. The pages fanned out like feathers between my fingers. My voice was calm, but each word felt like a hammer striking the silence. "No, we haven't. You told him I didn't care. You told me he didn't want to see me. You lied to both of us." Isolde's head snapped up, her eyes sharp, her mouth twisting into that smirk she wore whenever she wanted to remind me who the family favored. "Don't play victim now, Camila. You're twisting this." Vera's eyes flickered, her composure slipping as she glanced at the papers in my hand, then at Marshall, then quickly away. "This is unnecessary," she muttered, but her voice cracked on the last syllable. I reached into my bag again and pulled out Grandpa's letter, laying it on the coffee table like a final card on the table. He called me the one who saw when others chose not to. "You kept him from me while telling him I didn't care. You took my chance to say goodbye." Conrad shifted, his boots scuffing the hardwood, and for a moment I saw him for what he really was, a man who had spent his life keeping peace by siding with the loudest voice in the room. "This is the past, May," he said, his tone trying for gentle but coming out flat. "We can't change any of it." It was then I made my choice. Later that day, I compiled the irrefutable evidence, Grandpa's voice reading his letter, overlaid with images of his call logs showing their deliberate interference. I uploaded it to a private group for our Charleston community, a space where neighbors shared gardening tips, not family betrayals. I added no commentary, no music. I let his voice, calm and warm, carry the message on its own. It took less than 3 hours before Elo texted me. It's spreading. By morning, the video had made its way onto a local blog, then into the Facebook feeds of people who had shopped at the family jewelry store, who had smiled and waved at Vera in church, who had believed in the carefully curated image of our family for decades. I watched as the view count climbed, the comments rolling in. Some in disbelief, some in quiet support, others filled with anger at the betrayal they felt. They kept her away from him. For what? Money? One comment read. I always knew something was off with that family, another said. By the afternoon, I heard that clients were calling the jewelry store asking Vera uncomfortable questions, some canceling appointments, others demanding answers. Isold's workplace was buzzing with whispers, the perfect image she had built cracking under the pressure of Grandpa's words ringing in the ears of everyone who watched. Her boss pulled her aside, lowered his voice, and told her, "You should probably take a leave, Isold. Handle your family business." She came home that evening slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, yelling at Vera that I was ruining everything, that I was a pathetic charity case who got lucky. Their words were heavy, sharp, desperate. The walls they had built around their lives were cracking, and the community was seeing the truth through every fracture. Meanwhile, I spent my days at the annex, sorting Grandpa's research notes and filing patents that had been gathering dust in boxes marked with my name. I had hired 2 graduate students from the local college, both eager, bright-eyed, ready to help preserve the soil studies and be colony data Grandpa and I once worked on together. The greenhouse out back had started to fill with plants again, tomato vines twisting up strings, herbs scenting the warm air with rosemary and basil. The community reached out to me in ways I hadn't expected. Neighbors who had once looked through me now knocked on the annex's door with jars of homemade jam, thanking me for sharing the truth, for standing up when others wouldn't. Some shared stories of Grandpa, fixing their fences, dropping off extra vegetables, helping them with repairs without asking for payment. Each story made me feel closer to him, reminding me that his legacy was more than the annex or the funds. It was the quiet ways he helped others feel seen. Late one afternoon, I was checking the irrigation system when I heard a car door shut softly outside. I walked out to see Aita, my grandmother, stepping carefully across the gravel path. Her hair was white, her back curved with age, but her eyes were clear as she looked up at me. She didn't waste words, just handed me a small, worn box. Inside was Grandpa's pocket watch, its surface scratched but polished, the hinges creaking as I opened it. Taped inside was a tiny photograph of me as a child, sitting on Grandpa's knee, holding up a mason jar with a captured firefly, my grin wide and unguarded. I looked up at Aita, and she nodded, her voice quiet but strong. "He wanted you to have this. He never stopped waiting for you." The tears came before I could stop them, falling onto the dusty path between us. Aita reached out, patting my hand with her frail fingers before pulling me into a gentle hug. We stood there in the late afternoon sun, the smell of earth and tomato vines around us, the watch ticking softly in my palm. That evening, I sat by the window in the annex, watching the sunset bleed across the sky in shades of peach and gold. The watch sat on the table next to me, ticking steadily, reminding me of the time we lost and the time we still had. I glanced at the phone, seeing a notification that Vera and Isold had attempted to freeze the annex's funds through a court filing, hoping to claw back some control. But Marshall called an hour later, telling me calmly that the motion was denied. Grandpa's trust was airtight, irrevocable, unbreakable, just like his belief in me. I leaned back in my chair, letting the relief settle in, mingling with the grief, the quiet triumph that hummed in my chest. I picked up the pocket watch, holding it against my heart, feeling its warmth, the steady beat of its ticking, syncing with my breath. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the annex in soft twilight, I whispered into the stillness, "You tried to erase me, but you only made me stronger." I stood by the annex window a moment longer, letting the last streaks of dusk fade while the pocket watch ticked softly in my hand. I slipped it into my coat pocket, inhaling deeply before turning to shut off the lights, locking up for the night. The walk to my truck was quiet, the air carrying that crisp edge of late fall, the kind that whispers, winter is near. A week passed with steady days at the annex. I worked with the students on greenhouse rotations, signed off on supply orders, and drafted a proposal for a new soil restoration project Grandpa once dreamed of. I was beginning to build the life I wanted, piece by piece, with my own hands. Then Vera's message arrived. She asked to see me at the family house. Alone. I stared at the text for a long time before forwarding it to Elo, who responded within seconds. *, be careful. Don't go alone if you don't have to. *, I understood her concern, but this was something I needed to face, not hide from. That late afternoon, the sky draped in heavy gray. I parked outside the house I once called home. I sat in the truck for a breath, letting the engine tick quiet before stepping out. Gravel shifted under my boots as I walked up the path. Each step measured, the pocket watch warm against my palm inside my coat. Vera opened the door herself, which was unusual. Her hair was pinned back neatly, but there was a tightness around her eyes I'd seen only a few times, moments she couldn't control the narrative. She stepped aside without a word, letting me enter. Inside, the air was heavy, carrying the scent of old wood polish and the faint trace of whatever candle Vera kept burning to disguise the undercurrent of stale air and tension. Isolde was sitting on the edge of the couch, her posture stiff, phone in hand, but screen dark. She looked tired. The makeup that once made her look so perfect now only highlighted the shadows under her eyes. Conrad was by the window, arms folded, eyes averted, jaw working as if chewing on words he couldn't swallow. We sat in silence for a moment, the clock on the mantel ticking too loud. I stayed standing, the weight of every moment I had spent in this house pressing around me, reminding me of every birthday forgotten, every dismissal disguised as family concern. Every time they told me I was too sensitive or needed to grow up. Vera cleared her throat, folding her hands in her lap. Camila, she started, her voice calm but brittle. We asked you here because this feud isn't helping anyone. Isolde cut in, her voice tight. We're family. We can fix this. If you would just sign the annex over to us, we could figure out something fair for you. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let their discomfort fill the room. The silence pressing down on them the way their words once pressed down on me. Vera's composure slipped as she continued. We did what we thought was right for the family. For your future. We were protecting the legacy. I let out a quiet breath, the kind that steadies your spine when your knees want to buckle. My fingers found the pocket watch in my coat, wrapping around it as I slowly pulled it out and placed it on the coffee table between us. The soft tick echoed in the room, each sound like a drum in the hush. This, I said, my voice calm, level, is the only legacy that matters to me. Isolde's eyes widened, her lips parting as if she were about to argue, but no words came. Her face tightened, the desperation crumbling into anger. You think you're better than us now, she hissed. Vera reached across the table, fingertips brushing the watch as she whispered, Please, Camila, we need this. I pulled my hand back, slow but firm, letting the distance speak where words would have once failed me. No, I said, my voice clear, unwavering. You don't get to take from me anymore. Conrad looked at me then, his eyes hollow, mouth opening as if to say something, but he closed it again, dropping his gaze to the floor. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was clean, sharp, freeing. I stood, sliding the watch back into my pocket, letting its steady beat remind me that I was alive, that I was finally standing where I needed to be. I walked to the door without looking back. My footsteps the only sound. Each step peeling away the years I spent trying to earn scraps of love they were never willing to give. Outside, the cold air hit my face, crisp and honest, and I paused on the porch, letting it fill my lungs. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the real world moving forward, while the world I left behind crumbled in its own silence. Stepping into the chill, I whispered to myself, This is freedom. I let the cold air wrap around me as I stepped off the porch, the weight of the last conversation with my family falling away with each step toward my truck. The night was clear, stars blinking in quiet witness as I closed the door and started the engine. I didn't look back. The next morning, frost clung to the grass outside the annex, the sky still pale when I pulled up and unlocked the doors. The cold hit my face, sharp and honest. As I opened the greenhouse first, letting in the crisp air while the scent of soil and green leaves settled around me like a promise. Inside, the annex felt alive, buzzing softly with the hum of grow lights and the low chatter of 2 college students setting up trays for a new soil regeneration test. I slipped off my coat, hanging it on the peg by Grandpa's old workbench before pulling out the pocket watch and placing it next to my laptop. The steady ticking seemed to sync with the rhythm of the day, reminding me why I kept moving. I checked my email, answering a message from a mother asking if she could bring her daughter by to see the bees. I told her we'd be here all week, and she was welcome anytime. Just as I hit send, the greenhouse door opened and Aita shuffled in, bundled in her thick winter coat, a thermos of tea in her hands. "You'll catch cold in here, child," she said, settling into the chair I kept by the heater for her. Her eyes traced the rows of seedlings and soil trays before landing back on me. "Your grandfather would have been proud." I paused, glancing at her as I washed my hands in the small sink by the door. He always saw things in me that I couldn't see myself. Ida's gaze softened. He didn't just see them, Camila. He believed in them. The words filled the space around us, warm and steady. I carried them with me as I moved through the day, checking pH levels in the soil, helping one of the students adjust the grow lights, answering questions about compost layering for a group of curious teenagers who stopped by with their teacher. The annex was slowly becoming a small hub of hope. Parents brought their children, asking about the bees, the soil, the seeds. They wanted to know how to plant tomatoes that wouldn't die in the heat, how to keep the bees coming back to their gardens. Each question felt like a piece of the world being stitched back together. A quiet reminder that people cared, even in small ways. Later that afternoon, as the sun dropped lower, I found myself at Grandpa's old bench again, reviewing the research plans he left behind. The hum of the greenhouse, the warmth of the lights, and the rustling of leaves outside layered into a comforting background. I made notes on a new compost formula we were testing, smiling at the thought of Grandpa's quiet nod of approval. Aita stood to leave, pausing by the door. She placed her hand on mine, her fingers thin but warm. "Your grandfather always said you were the future, Camila. I see it now." I held her gaze, the tightness in my chest loosening as I nodded. "Thank you for believing in him, and in me." After she left, I stepped outside, the cold brushing against my cheeks as I checked on the compost bins by the back fence. The wind picked up, sending a swirl of leaves across the gravel, and I closed my eyes, letting the moment settle deep in my bones. That evening, the last of the students left, promising to return tomorrow for the next batch of experiments. I wiped down the tables, washed the mugs left by the sink, and turned off the greenhouse lights, leaving only the soft glow of the annex lamps. I walked through each section of the annex, the ticking of the pocket watch in my pocket syncing with each footstep. I checked the lock on the back door, turned off the heater, and finally stood at the front door, looking back at the space that had become more than just a project. It had become a promise to myself that I would never again shrink to fit into someone else's expectations. A promise that I would honor Grandpa's belief in me, not by chasing after the family that never valued me, but by building something real, something that mattered. Stepping outside, I pulled the door closed, locking it with a quiet click. The stars overhead shone brighter than I'd seen in a long time, the cold biting at my skin, but somehow making me feel more alive. I exhaled, breath clouding in the cold air as I whispered into the quiet night, "Tomorrow, we build again." The morning after I locked the annex under a sky of stars, I woke to the soft chirping of birds outside my window. The air smelled of dew and earth, a promise that spring had finally come to Charleston. I made my coffee, letting the warmth of the mug seep into my palms as I stood by the kitchen window, watching the lights spill across the street. It felt like a quiet celebration of everything I had fought for, everything I had built. Driving to the annex, I passed blooming magnolia trees lining the road, their petals drifting onto the pavement like confetti. I parked under the oak Grandpa once planted near the annex entrance, turning off the engine and taking a moment to breathe in the scent of fresh soil and grass before stepping out. Inside, the annex buzzed with life. Students from local colleges were setting up trays for new seedling tests, chatting softly while they worked. The greenhouse was warm, the air inside holding the scent of basil, tomatoes, and rich earth. I moved through the aisles, checking on the progress of the sprouts, offering advice where needed. A gentle correction here, a word of encouragement there. "Miss Camila, these sprouts are standing straighter today," a student named Carla said, pointing to a tray of seedlings. "They're reaching for the light," I replied with a small smile, touching a leaf lightly. "They know what they're made for." By mid-morning, families began arriving. Parents guided their children into the greenhouse, pointing out bees moving between the flowers, showing them the worm bins and compost piles. I watched a mother lift her toddler to see a bee resting on a sunflower. The child's eyes wide with wonder. One little girl, no older than 8, tugged at my sleeve while I was checking soil moisture. "Miss Camila," she whispered, holding up a jar with a single bee inside. "Can you show me how to let it go without hurting it?" I knelt, taking the jar carefully. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, twisting off the lid slowly. We watched together as the bee hesitated for a moment before lifting into the air, catching the light as it flew back toward the flowers. She clapped softly, looking up at me. "I want to help the bees, too." "You already did," I told her, ruffling her hair before sending her back to her mother, who mouthed, "Thank you," with tears in her eyes. Later that day, I returned to the small office at the back of the annex. Grandpa's pocket watch ticking softly on my desk next to my laptop. I opened the watch, looking at the tiny photo of me as a child, dirt on my cheeks, a gap-toothed smile stretching across my face. I could almost hear Grandpa's laugh, feel his rough hand patting my shoulder after we planted tomatoes together. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered, letting the tears come this time, letting them fall freely as the light shifted across the floor. In the afternoon, Ida arrived, her slow steps measured but determined as she made her way to the chair near the greenhouse. I brought her tea, sitting beside her as she hummed softly, watching the children learn how to plant seeds in small pots. "You've turned this place into something beautiful," she said, looking around the annex, her eyes soft. "It was always here," I replied. "I just had to believe I was allowed to build it." Ida reached over, squeezing my hand. "Your grandfather was right about you." I nodded, my heart swelling with quiet pride, knowing that the annex wasn't just a building filled with plants and buzzing bees. It was a place of healing, a promise kept, a legacy transformed into living action. Occasionally, I still received carefully worded emails from Isolde and Vera asking to meet, to talk, to work things out. Each time I closed the message without replying, feeling no need to defend my space, no need to invite them back into the life they once tried to erase. Because peace, I had learned, is sometimes found in the choice to move forward without dragging the past along. As the day wound down, the last families left, promising to return next week for a community planting day we had scheduled. I walked through the annex, turning off lights, tidying tools, and making notes for the following day's work. The air outside was cool, the sky painted with the colors of the setting sun. As I stepped out to lock the doors, standing under the magnolia tree, I looked back at the annex, the windows glowing warmly against the encroaching dusk. I pressed the pocket watch to my chest, feeling the steady ticking against my heart, grounding me in the knowledge that I had measured up, not by their standards, but by my own. The breeze rustled through the branches above, carrying the scent of blossoms and earth, and I felt a calm I hadn't known I was capable of. The past, with its betrayals and silence, no longer defined me. I was free to live, to grow, to build. As I turned to leave, walking down the path back to my truck, I let the final words rise softly from my lips. A promise to myself, to Grandpa, to the small girl I once was, who had waited so long to be seen. This is what it means to measure up. My story is about finding your own worth, even when your family tries to diminish you. It's about fighting for truth and building a legacy that truly matters. Have you ever felt like you had to choose between family expectations and your own path? Or experienced a betrayal that changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your experiences.